I think Arnie was a special person in terms of this because he faced a huge crisis in his life. He was very in love with his life and being a tennis champion and a surgeon, and then he contracted polio. And a lot of people don't know his story, but he wanted to die because he didn't have any idea what kind of life he could have. But what he decided was that he could either be a dermatologist with an assistant, or he could be a psychiatrist. And he got very lucky that some people gave him a chance. And it was out of his work with Fritz Perls that he brought together that 4-page paper, Paradoxical Theory of Change, which I think everyone who has studied Gestalt therapy has read.
Yes, yes. And as
I'm reading the film, and I want to do an exercise with people, and I would also like to talk about Arnie if people have questions about him, because I knew him for quite a long time.
So as I know, the relationship was quite close, right?
Yes, he was my first trainer. I read a lot about Gestalt therapy in the late 60s and early 70s, and actually studied it, but not in an institute. So when I went to the Gestalt Therapy Institute of Los Angeles, he was my first trainer. And incredible the way he worked when he could only move from the neck up and move one hand a little bit. Mm-hmm. And when I was president of GTILA, I instigated his becoming a lifelong member and honoring him in that way, and also became friends with him.
Mm-hmm.
And with his wife, who was quite an amazing person too.
Yeah, Rita.
Yes.
And how was it? Like, how did you figure out to make such a really huge and detailed film about it?
How did it start? Oh, when Arnie died, Rita, his wife, gave me a videotape interview of him. And I watched it and put it on the shelf and actually forgot about it over the years. And I was looking for something for a training program one summer in Europe. And I came across this video, and I had no idea what it was. I had stuck it in my player, and there was Arnie in this interview. And so I took it with me to the summer and asked our faculty and a few of the participants, if I interviewed people who knew him, would this be something interesting to them? And people said yes. So without realizing what I was embarking on, talk about a void, I began searching for the people who knew him, interviewing them, watching lots of documentaries, and deciding what it is I liked about some and not others, taking notes. I learned how to edit through a Mac program, and I just started putting it together. Mm-hmm. So it was quite an experience. It was 3 years of probably 3 days a week, 12 to 15 hours a day, but remarkable. And I think the best part of it for me was meeting people who knew Arnie, who had been affected by Arnie, and their real joy in meeting with someone so many years later, because this was 15 years later when I was doing this. Mm-hmm. And they were just so excited about sort of renewing their relationship with Arnie by these interviews. It was great.
Yeah, and to save him for the followers.
Yeah.
And it could have been quite an emotional work, was it?
Well, it was. And in fact, every time I still watch the film, I feel quite emotional. It's a very He had a very moving life. And he had a way of being present with people that was quite remarkable.
Yeah, and it was really a touching deep film, but when I saw the short minutes about the red cabrio or some red sport car, what he wanted to drive, that was so like up and like joy and pain in the very same time in the film, right? Yeah. And as I know, Ernie was the client of Fritz Perls, right?
He was a client. He had heard about Fritz through some colleagues. They said he was this really interesting man who was doing some amazing work. But when they described it to him, he wasn't interested. He thought, oh, this is just a fluke. But he kept hearing about him. So he finally invited him to the mental hospital where he was working and training interns. Mm-hmm. And they gave Fritz their most difficult patient. And Fritz was able to make contact with this patient, and nobody else had been able to. Mm-hmm. So Arnie kept inviting him back. And whenever he would come, he would stay on the grounds of the hospital, and Arnie would take advantage of having therapy with him. Mm-hmm. He writes in The Only Gift, his next to the last book, The Only Gift, he writes that Fritz, he writes about his relationship with Fritz.
And I think, what is the title?
It's The Only Gift. Mm-hmm. There was a trilogy of books. There was Flying Without Wings, which the film is named after. There was A Graceful Passage, which was about death and dying. And the first one was about being ill and also being a doctor, so being a patient and a doctor. And the last one was about friendships, and a very interesting part of friendships, that the phenomenological experience of each person in the friendship is quite different, when often we expect it to be the same. Mm-hmm. You know, you're my best friend and I'm your best friend, but it often isn't that way. And that book was very helpful to me with my son, because I realized that what he means to me is not the same as what I mean to him. It's a very, very different relationship, even though. So, and also Fritz wrote about in and out of the garbage pail. So you can get a difference in the flavor of their relationship.